my secretary. Before I get started, there was some questions last month about the fee schedule that the county passed. So I just want to pass around our resolution for those who maybe, I'm waiting for Joe, who don't, who didn't have the, well, like the store exemption, the commercial, the household, blah, blah, blah. Because Joe, I think, asked about it last month, and he could get a copy of that. So hopefully he's, nah, I got nothing else to do. I'm actually waiting for Joe and a couple others, but I think we'll get started.
Hey, John, you had handed out a couple months ago.
Oh, here he is. Hi, Joe.
Hi there.
I missed the meeting. Did
Joe
we go
here.
over?
I bet, yes.
Sign in, Josh.
Anything get
Sign
resolved?
in, please.
Yeah, no
And I need Anne Marie to
Nothing.
start this.
Some discussion that
Probably just a
all
start.
parcels should be
Let me just-
charged some form of
Yeah.
fee. I think got some interest.
Good morning, Annie. I don't want to touch her equipment. Something happens, she'll claim me, accuse me for breaking it. Okay. Okay, good morning. I'd like to call our solid waste meeting to order. Where there's a handout being passed around, please sign in. And actually, where's Bill? Bill, I'm gonna start with you. Just mention about our hazardous waste day that's coming up, and if you have a flyer, if you want to pass that on, it'd be great.
Sure. Save the date, Sunday, September 22nd. We have our annual county household hazardous waste collection event. The event's scheduled for all county households from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And that's going to take place down at the closed county landfill, 91 Landfill Drive. It's a chance for county residents, and I stress residential households only. It's a chance for them to get rid of any toxic chemicals that have been accumulated in the home, oil-based paints, cleaning solvents, pesticides, mercury. We pretty much get it all. It's a great way to safely and properly eliminate those materials from the waste stream rather than tipping them and having an accident occur, a spill, or other enforcement actions down the road. So I brought along a flyer here. If everyone would please help spread the word. If you have constituents who would like to get additional information about this program, they can call my office at 807-0291. And we open the registration database on Monday, August 26th. And we'll sign folks up over the phone. Basically, you just need 2 forms of ID, have a household here in the county, and that's pretty much all we're going to really nail you for. The event is no cost to participants. However, it is an expensive program for the county. So it's an important thing, something we really have to do and should do. And this is a chance for folks to participate.
Great. Any questions for Bill on that?
What's our major expense in doing this?
Mainly contractual, Ira. The vendor solicitation runs anywhere from $9,500 to $10,500 for a one-day event. We have to have basically a 60-day plan filed in advance with New York State DEC. They have to approve our vendors, they have to approve our location, our staffing, and our collection measures, protocol, overnight storage, site security, spill prevention, and if a spill does occur, what we plan to do about it to remediate that. So there's a lot of logistical expenses involved, but contractually that's the big number.
The county gets grant money for half the grant, Bill, and it's...
Yes, we do.
Okay.
We do receive a New York State DEC 50% matching grant that reimburses the county for half of the expenditure costs for vendor expenses for that day.
So we like pay this vendor $10,000 and then it takes all the hazardous waste and disposes of it?
Correct.
Yeah.
They hold us harmless, and they are approved and have proper permitting. We have a detailed permitting checklist that we go through with them to make sure they're in compliance.
You think they make money doing that?
The firm probably does. We solicit anywhere from, typically when we bid this out, either each year or each 3 years if it's renewed with a current vendor. We solicit 15 or 20 vendors, and we typically get 6 or 7 responses back. So I'm sure that in the private sector they are able to capitalize on that.
And how many did we have last year, sign up, Bill?
We had 166 sign up, and I believe 134 households did participate.
So that's great. I mean, all that hazardous waste belongs in our landfill and shipped out of the county, and that's right in our backyard, so it's a good program, and thank you, Bill, for doing that every year for us. Paul, are you handing around something?
Yes, well, I just wanted to give one to Sam, because.
Did I get one?
Yes, you have it right in
Oh.
front of you.
Okay.
Oh,
Oh, great, okay, Paul, so I'm gonna start with you next.
okay. Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Sorry I missed a meeting a while ago. I've had some difficulties with Mom, so I'm still working with that. Anyway, we had talked about possible long-term solutions, so I'm gonna do things a little bit in reverse, and also to try to get some information from the state as to what's really going on. So I called the Association of Counties, and they put me in touch with Katie Vesio, and she is an attorney with NISAC. I explained to her what we were trying to do here and asked her if she could get us some information around the state of New York with regards to who's really in this business and who's out, and if they're in it, how are they going about doing it, and what kind of the trend is over the long term, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Katie was extremely helpful and sent me back the email, which I made copies of for everybody here. And there are some points on this that I think are very important. First of all, the only county in the state of New York, according to Katie, that's not involved in this process in any way whatsoever is Erie, which is, a large county. Others are in consortiums, and if you look at the top of this memo, Oneida Herkimer, the Genesee, Livingston, Orleans, Wayne up in the Finger Lakes, the Development Authority, Montgomery, Otsego, et cetera, et cetera. So there are consortiums around the state where counties are getting together and working together with regards to the solid waste business. The mandate was really created by permitting requirements imposed upon Part 360 regulations. And she explained that this was the thing because of the recycling regulations that had to be put in place that got counties involved in this when this law was put in place in the first place. So I guess us and many others got involved in it, and Sam could correct me, based on that statutory requirement. She gave me some recommendations with regards to names of people who she thought might be helpful to Sullivan County and to the legislature. Obviously, a long-term decision as to which way to go is a decision that has to be made by the county legislature. She said that she felt Hans Arnold, who was one of the real experts recognized in the state, would be extremely helpful if the legislature chose to have him come down and take a look at Sullivan County's situation and maybe discuss with the legislature what viable possibilities might be there in the future. And I want to refer to something that was said a couple of months ago here, because Ira and Sam both said it. And they both said the same thing. And that was, you can't be half in it and half out of it. And they were both correct in that. The more I thought about what they said, the more I realized they were absolutely on the money. And I think over the long term, the legislature has got to look down the road and decide whether it wants to go the route of what Katie said. Quite a few of the counties are slowly phasing their way out of this business, getting rid of their debt and just getting out of it as best they can, or making a commitment to actually be in it. And I think Sam said you need the hole in the ground, and that I think instantly got misunderstood by people that there was anybody here thinking about trying to reopen the existing landfill, which we realized from a legal standpoint, psychological location, that's not what anybody intended, can't be, isn't gonna happen. Nobody could even, seriously consider that. But John had made a point right in the very, very beginning. I think it may have been at the first meeting. And as you think about it, he may have been hitting on something. If this legislature makes a determination that it doesn't want to phase its way out of this business, it wants to try to stay in this business, then it needs to look at the concept of the consortiums as other groups of counties have done it. Pike, Wayne, Delaware, Sullivan, and Orange are 5 counties, closely aligned geographically on the ground, And of course, no matter where you try to cite something, you're gonna have NIMBY to deal with, not in my backyard, obviously. However, when you think about that, you may find something in existence that could be expanded upon or used, or a location in a remote area that might make itself available where the 5 counties could split the cost and develop something if, and I emphasize, it's a very big if, this legislature down the road says, we want to continue to stay in this business, not pay off the debt, slowly try to figure out a way to get out of it. But that's a long-term thing that the county legislature is going to have to deal with. Katie Vesio is terrific. As I said, she's counsel up there, assistant counsel in NISAC. I'm sure that she would be helpful. Her phone numbers are there. The other contact information is there for the other people that she talked about. Anybody can feel free to call them, talk to them, get ideas, whatever. So I wanted the legislature and everyone to, have a copy of this so that you could refer to it and use it down the road. So,
Great, Paul, I just have one question for you. When you said that they slowly were gonna phase their way out of the garbage, was it, gave it back to the towns? How do they do that? Or they sent it, did they say what their solution was?
I didn't ask Katie
Okay.
which counties and what process. She said, generally speaking, and it took her about a week and a half to get back to me,
Mhm.
almost 2 weeks after I initially called her. So she spent time doing this and contacting people all over, and others that really had a lot of information in the state with the references she gave us. But she said a lot of the counties are just looking to figure out ways to slowly get themselves out of being involved, however they're being involved, get somehow one way or another into the private enterprise. This legislature has got to make a decision down the road. Either you're going to be in this business or you're going to get out of this business.
Mhm.
Sam and Ira were right. You can't be half in it and half out of it. It just isn't practical over the long term. And I'm not aware that anybody would disagree with that philosophy over the long haul. I think they were both right on the money. So, Kathy, I hope this will help you and the other members of the legislature.
Okay.
I think it gives you contacts, people, places that you can go, hopefully get help, information on these consortiums. I think maybe Katie can help you with that. How do they put these things together, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot to look at if you're gonna try to stay in the business. If your philosophy is get out of it, she can help there.
And you're right, that's a long-term plan, but I'm just wondering if there's ever been, a grant money available to site a new landfill? Anybody ever, did she say anything in that?
No, and I didn't
Okay.
ask her that. I
Okay.
really don't have any idea, but
Mhm.
certainly we can.
Okay.
I think Katie was great. I mean, she gave you her numbers, et cetera. She's
Okay.
there, and so I'm sure she would try to be helpful, Kathy, if you had questions.
Okay.
Maybe put together a group and email her and, let her try to get back to you with whatever information she can come up with. And she emphasized numerous times that this Hans Arnold was statewide one of the most respected people and knowledgeable in this business. And she said, I think if he comes down, hopefully he could, help your legislature try to figure out what they want to do over the long haul. So I pass that on for legislature's help.
Right, so maybe I can have him come down to one of our legislative meetings
Or
in a
something.
couple months, just to give us, some background update as to what other counties have done, sure.
And also, maybe prior to that, take a look at what we're doing and have done and where we are, where our transfer stations are, where our debt is. One of the things that keeps coming back to me all of the time, and I think Sam hit on it or Ira did, when, Ed told us that it's costing us $4.3 million a year to truck all this garbage to Seneca Meadows in Syracuse. I mean, when we stop and think about the cost of what we're spending, what we're doing, we gotta come up with a long-term better solution than this. We gotta get the debt paid off too, and get out of it. So anyway, enough said, I don't wanna belabor.
No, that's great, and thanks for researching and getting that information for us. Now, the last couple months, we've been talking about commercial properties and how we're gonna try to make things fair and equitable. So, this is your list, Paul, can you
Well,
tell?
it's, I did this only for the purposes of discussion and just for a little preliminary background. Based on what Bonnie had said, she felt that the assessors had general information with regards to square footage. And the
Okay.
concept was, and we all agreed from the first meeting, we want to make this fair. Fix it,
Right.
make it fair, not continue to go on with what we're doing with these
Mhm.
commercial costs. So I just put this together for discussion purposes. However, Bonnie told me this morning there's another aspect to this which When you think about how the RPS system is crafted and set up, this will be extremely difficult in any form to attempt to work with. And I want to defer to Bonnie so that she can
Okay.
explain that, because that'll take us to another discussion on ad valorem, which we need to have. So let me defer to Bonnie,
Bonnie.
please.
I just wanted to explain on a commercial card, and if you have the small commercial buildings are gonna be easy, if you just have a small one building, square footage is there. The bigger and more complex they get, they're done by sections. So this building, for example, is not gonna be on one card, square footage of X amount of square feet. It doesn't work like that. It would be sectioned off. There would be a section down there, so you're gonna have all these sections on the inventory of the RPS, and nowhere is it total. So you would have to go into each section and somehow total this up, so that you knew if a parcel had one or more buildings, whatever. In order to get what that total square footage was, it's gonna have to be done manually.
Now, what about, can I use Walmart as an example? So how is Walmart's done? Is that by?
It's possible that it's done in one, but it's hard to say. Like, the shipping in might be a section,
Oh,
the
Lord.
retail part might be a section, the offices might be a section, I'm not, because it's not like I mean, it's one big building, and I'm not sure without looking at that card, but most commercial stuff, that's how it's done, is by sections.
Okay, Paul?
And just so that we can follow up and kind of picture this in our mind, not only the information on the data card that she's talking about, but what the assessor and the individual towns have chosen to load into the system for their purposes. They know what they're doing when they look at their record, so they understand the information that they need. That does not necessarily mean it's gonna be there in a methodology that's gonna work. It's the same problem that we have with the codes. We had initially thought that if you did some kind of concept like this, and you could change the square footages and the numbers, it doesn't matter. But one of the things I was going to suggest was, so that we don't waste a tremendous amount of time, and maybe Nancy could have been helpful, because I know she was able to work with Dave and get the figures on the exempts, which we need to talk about in a minute. But if Dave Brokaw took a look at this, I mean, he may come back to you and say, look, I've looked at the system in the towns. This can't possibly work, because what you need to make it work isn't loaded in there in the format that you need to get this to run. You can put these numbers against it, but you're not gonna get any kind of right answers. So if that's the case, from what Bonnie says, that further complicates trying to fix this whole commercial schedule. How in the world are you gonna go about doing it? What gets us back to the question that Bonnie asked at the very first meeting we had in the other room: how much money are we actually collecting from the exempts? That's why we went into this whole machination thing in the first place, which, thanks to Nancy, she was able to get the answer, a couple of $100,000, did I understand?
Just under 300.
Yeah, just under 300,000 a year we're getting out of the exempts. We all know that if we could get away from the codes and all this other stuff and simply do an ad valorem levy like you do for county, town, school, all your special districts and everything else, all these problems go away. The special committee to correct the errors go, everything else is gone. The system works. When you try to put anything else on top of the system that it's not designed for, we're gonna continue to have the problems that we have. And I think one of the decisions that's gotta be made by the committee in making a recommendation to the legislature is, if this is all we're collecting, is that amount of money worth going through what we're going through in order to try to do this? I think it's a decision that somebody has gotta make and make a
But
recommendation.
why
I don't know
would-
how else to say it.
Yeah, but why would you not, I know it's under 300,000, and some people thought it was more, but why would you not wanna, tap into the tax exempt, Paul? What would,
If you could do it, Kathy,
Mhm.
theoretically, and I say this theoretically, because we have to be clear on what's actually happening. If you could do this theoretically and have the system that the assessors have set up under the state law work so that you could do the other things that you're trying to put in and collect it fairly, fine. The problem is, even trying to do this simple thing with the commercials, it's not going to work. So you're constantly in this mess. The codes don't work, we all know that, there isn't any argument about it. This isn't going to work. What can you possibly do that's not gonna be a constant, ongoing problem that you're never gonna get away with? So you have to make a decision. Is that amount of money worth it? If you could collect it and do both, yes, absolutely, you do. It wouldn't even be a discussion.
Right.
We wouldn't even be sitting here. But that's not what's happening. So it forces you to back up and almost back into something.
Okay.
There's another part of it too, that before we go any further, we should just take a minute so we're all on the same wavelength and have a clear understanding. In December, the legislature did the right thing. I don't think there's any question about it. When you go back and you look at what you passed and what you changed with regards to definitions, and you and I were talking about it
Yes,
on the phone,
mhm.
the legislature did the absolute right thing. They expanded the base so that this January, you're gonna have some kind of a fee against the unimproved land, okay? That's good. You'll expand the base. It helps to reduce it on all improved properties. It's gonna help the private property owner, it'll help, it's gonna help everyone. Okay, now, think about that for a minute. If the legislature philosophically says, we're already gonna do the unimproved land, but we wanna keep that reasonable. And those have been comments that have been made here in the past, and I know Cindy's worried about the farms, and,
Right.
I think we got that taken care of with the ag assessment, so that resolves that problem. But then you'd have to kind of back into your levy. How much money do we wanna collect from the unimproveds? How much money do we wanna collect from the commercials? How much money do we wanna try to collect from the residentials? And as soon as you begin to ask those questions mechanically, then you've got to try to figure out some kind of a rate or something and try to go into the system back against the codes. So no matter what you try to do, and you've already done this, I mean, you're going to have some kind of something which you're going to have to figure out between now and the end of the year. If there's any question you're going to do it, it's done, it's finished business. You have to undo it to stop it. So in order to accomplish that between now and December, you're gonna have to figure out how you're gonna try to address it, and you're gonna be back into the same problems that got us around this table in the first place, that we've been going through. So when you back out of that, you add that on top of what we're talking about here with the commercials, it gets you right back to where we were when Bonnie asked the question the very first time we met, what are we doing this for? Why aren't we working at an ad valorem basis? Is this enough to worry about? That's your bottom line question you gotta answer before you do anything else. Because if you don't do that, then you're getting yourself into all of these other situations, and this is just gonna go on with nothing but problems. So you've
Bonnie.
really got a major decision to make. Bonnie?
Bonnie.
I just think we need to go back to the tax exempt thing too, because you have to understand, when we're saying tax exempt, everybody's thinking these 420s. It's not. It's the school, it's the library, it's the fire department, it's the churches, and it's the same taxpayers that are helping to keep the firehouse open and whatever. They have to put it in their budget. If you're gonna charge them $100, $300, $500, whatever, they have to put it in their budget so they have that money to pay, and it's the same taxpayers that are gonna pay it in the fire tax. So I think if it's the $300,000 we're collecting, I think if you take out the college, the schools, the firehouses, and just see what the difference is. I don't think it's,
Nancy, when you and I, when we set up initially with the tax exempt, I think we were trying to reach,
Well, I think it was trying to be fair and hit everybody. I mean, I think what Bonnie's saying is true. I mean, you would also have things in there like the museums
and the veterans' homes, which I get
Right.
beat up every month about the veterans having to charge us for our garbage when we have, one, the same old, the
but
one
they're
bag a
all in
month.
that same
I know.
category as tax exempt, and I think it's just people have a different idea of what that is.
And if you take a look at Fallsburg, you're almost 40% exempt because the two prisons skyrocket that number over there
And
because it's an
college.
enormous amount of money, including the college, the airport, and throw all that in. So I think she's absolutely right on the money. You back all that stuff out by code, and if Dave can figure out what's left just under the 420s and the simple exempts, you're not collecting that big amount of money that everybody thought you were.
And a lot of the 600 code for the camps and that are
Well,
religious.
everything that your municipalities own too, the municipalities are each paying the bill. Well, if we get an $850 bill, we have to add that into our budget somewhere, and we have to raise it on our end, so they're paying again, just
The
for the
village and towns.
municipalities to have. I mean, you got 15 municipalities that are paying. You got the parks, I mean, it's all stuff that the residents are using.
one of the problems, Kathy, that I know you'll face and Josh will face is the complexity of all of this when you look down on it from an airplane view and you try to see all the aspects of attempting to put something together that's literally gonna run right and work and be fair on the January bills. And I know, it's just that unless you're intimately involved in this kind of thing, it's hard even maybe for some of the other members of the legislature to really picture this, because it's not something that they work with all the time.
I
So
know.
it's just, it can't possibly be in their mind, it's just not something they're dealing with on a daily basis.
I do think there can still be though, like a fee per parcel, some kind of, if you already have that in place, just so, because the people do have access to go to the transfer stations and stuff. So I mean, there could be some money generated.
You talk about this tax exempt money?
Well, I
Or-
think any parcel could be charged,
She's
A
talking
base
about.
fee.
like,
Same-
like a base
Same
fee, every
number.
parcel
Oh, okay.
charge so much just because they have access. And I think you could still get something like that.
And no codes
From
or
it.
anything.
And
John,
no
I know you're
quotes,
sitting there
just a
chomping at the
set
bit.
fee
Go
per
ahead,
parcel.
John, you're up.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Never mind, go ahead.
No, that's why some weeks ago already, some months ago, I had hoped that we could come up with a breakdown of the cost of operations and tying it into what Bonnie's talking
Yeah,
about.
Nancy.
There's certain items that I believe should be charged to all parcels.
I can get a copy to sure everybody.
I asked Nancy to bring us that info. I apologize, Ed is on vacation, Ed McAndrews, but I did ask Nancy to get us some information on that, the
Just
breakdown.
how much is for maintenance of the landfill? How much is for recycling? These are common and can be used by all parcels. Why not let all parcels pay a portion of that cost? And then the various other breakdown of the costs can be assigned elsewhere for charges, so.
And so everybody understands mechanically, no codes are involved, nothing. You got a fee, same amount to everything, doesn't matter what it is. If you put something like that in place, it works. If you try to do anything else, you're right back where you were before, it doesn't
So,
work.
so Paul, one of your
Did I say that
suggestions
right?
is, and if I
Okay.
understand you correctly, is you'd like us to do away with the tax exempt because we feel like we're not, willing, getting to,
What I'm saying is, if the legislature makes a philosophical decision to go ad valorem with its levy, to collect whatever money you determine you need to meet your budgetary obligation, if you do that on an ad valorem basis, it gets you out of all of the other problems that you're trying to deal with. And even with the unimproved land, large parcels are valued more, small parcels are valued minimally. It automatically applies just like any other special district levy, fire, water, sewer, it doesn't matter what you're doing, it works. It
Okay.
works, it gets you out of this mess.
You start special districts, you have problems. First of all, you can't supersede special districts that already exist. And you have some garbage districts in the county. So right off the bat, you can have holes in it. State law won't allow you to supersede a town district which already exists, and we have a few. And you can't put any pre-existing debt into a special district.
And if your ad valorem levy is pre-existing debt, so even if you try to
We
do.
looked very long and hard at special districts a few years ago. Special districts are a real obstacle.
If you do a countywide special garbage district, that's correct. If you just do a local law with a fee against each parcel, will that fly? It might, Sam, if you take a look. Forget doing a countywide garbage district. We
Well, you really
looked at
do it.
that twice, doesn't work. Try just a fee, like you're doing with a local law here.
You already
Because
have that
you're
in
doing a
place.
fee right now. Commercials are paying $300 or whatever, that's a fee, just
I'll
against.
look at that and talk to Ira about it.
Yeah, see, because that might work. Now, the other question is this, you're right. If what Bonnie is talking about can't be done where there's already a garbage district, like in a village or something, then you would have some holes. And you either live with that, or then what you're suggesting doesn't work either. That's why this is so complicated, almost nobody
No,
understands.
It actually isn't, and we've gone through it, we keep reinventing this same wheel and rolling it down the street. When we said, like Bill Cutler will remember, when we said you need a hole in the ground, there was one available a few years ago. And that was another county's burn plant that was looking for an ash fill. And the proposal then was do an ash for trash agreement so that our expanded landfill would only take ash, and you wouldn't have had all of the problems that a regular landfill has. It only needs to have a single liner as well, so it's less expensive, but it wasn't pursued. We met extensively with the two gentlemen who run Oneida Herkimer. That's the biggest success story in the state, probably other than Westchester. It was never pursued.
Well, you know, Paul, there was such a bad taste in people's mouths from what happened at the landfill that you couldn't even mention expanding. After we spent all that money pursuing the permit, we cleaned it up, there's no odor, we spent a fortune. You mentioned that word and people, you know, there was no way you were going down that road. But Sam's right, we could have had an ash facility there, and we looked into it, but certain things you just can't do. But Ira, did you want to say something about, because I know you and Nancy and Sam helped put this together, we tried to make it fair.
Well, first of all, I had nothing to do with putting this together.
Oh, you didn't?
I'm saying, I've been opposed to this solid waste fee from the get-go. I've been opposed to the concept of having this fee based on class codes, because it's like putting a square peg in a round hole.
Well, you wanted to expand,
The law was written improperly, and has been administered improperly. And my understanding of the purpose of this committee was to try to make it work a little better. This discussion, for example, about creating a district is all well and good, but it sort of mixes apples and oranges in the respect that I think it's a worthwhile discussion if we want to talk about the future of solid waste management in county. I think that's a possibility for what direction we move in, but it doesn't address this problem. This problem always seemed to be, as Sam pointed out, and I never had anything to do with that determination. I don't know if it's right or wrong. Frankly, I'm dubious, but that's the opinion we've heard, that's the opinion we've been giving, which is you can't create a district with old debt. And this system was designed to deal with existing debt. And we either have to do this until this debt is paid for, and in the meantime look for the future of solid waste in the county, or we have to change it and go back, is what Paul is suggesting, is just scrap this and go back to an ad valorem system. Which means, you know, if we're raising $5 million a year, just to pick a number, then we've got to do away with this fee and now raise another $5 million on real property taxes, which is, everything else being equal, another, 10% increase in taxes. So, you know, are people going to be happier with that? Because you've done away with the fee? You know, the fact that you've increased their taxes by 10%, I assume, is not going to be good news for the average taxpayer in the county. But notwithstanding that, it may be the fairest, you know, the right approach. Now, if the legislature wants to stick with this user fee, I think there are ways we can clean it up and make it work a little better. We've identified those. I think we've got to tweak the commercial rates so there isn't just one rate. I personally think, and I've advocated for a long time, that we assess vacant land. And I think we have to look at a unit fee and the caps and see if they can be made more fair. I think if we address those three issues, we would make this system, which I don't think works real well, but I think we'd make it a little better.
Well, I think for short term, I agree with you, but so we just talked about the commercial fees, but how would, Bonnie says they're not, it's not by square footage.
Right.
So how could we address that? How
Bonnie,
is it?
I agree with you, first of all, so don't think I'm attacking you, because I know RPS somewhat, but using Walmart as the example, isn't usually the first one the biggest part of the building, even if it doesn't have all of it?
Probably the
Or Home
retail
Depot,
section.
or,
Probably.
so in some sense, that might work.
But
with
that's
this.
one parcel with one building.
Right, but so we use the racetrack as a second example where there's numerous buildings on one.
Right.
And again, I know it's not your
Right,
district, but, you know, just thinking out loud, if we went with this system, it may somewhat work because usually the main parcel, the square footage, even though it may be bigger than, it might hit the minimum because of the main parcel.
That's what you
Isn't
would
that
have to
correct?
do though, is use part of that parcel. You wouldn't be doing a total of the whole parcel.
Right.
But we know from looking at hundreds of appeals over the last few years.
I apologize, I know you're on that committee.
Josh and myself, Nancy,
Right.
Bob, when he was here. I mean, we know the difficulty when you sit down and actually look at a property or have enough property owner come in and say, regardless what's on the system or regardless what I'm being assessed for, or regardless what my class code is. You know, I actually have an old restaurant that hasn't been open in 20 years, it's not usable, it burned down 3 years ago, or, you know, you hear a million different stories. It is very difficult to compute just based on square footage. Having said that, I do think though that we could probably add, you know, instead of having one commercial category of $300, I'm sure we could add it, make 3 categories and make it a little fairer so that you have, you don't have a situation where your big retailers like Walmart, Home Depot, ShopRite, others, some of the restaurants and diners are paying the same amount as a retail establishment that generates very little solid waste. Just so I'm clear as far as where I want to be, although I've said it before, and Cole mentioned it again today. To me, this regional idea, this, whether you call it a consortium or a regional, counties that are still still haven't done something amongst themselves. Us, Ulster County, you mentioned what, Pike County, Delaware County?
Pike, Wayne, Delaware, Orange, and Sullivan is a possibility. John had
You
suggested.
know, I know I've spoken to some county officials over the last couple of years, formally and otherwise. I mean, there's a great interest, in my opinion, in doing this, and I think it makes a huge amount of sense to have 3 or 4 counties get together with us and handle solid waste, whether that, and that could be done, to me, on a huge scale in a way that creates revenue for all of us. And that, to me, that's the key, creating revenue, not just creating expenses, which is what we've done with this exportation agreement, in my opinion. We could have a composting facility, you know, we could increase our recycling. And, you know, we could do all of these things, explore new technology. You mentioned, somebody mentioned, I think Sam, recreating the wheel all the time. I mean, that's what we're doing here. It's really unnecessary because there's enough known today, and there are other counties doing things very successfully. You know, and Sam says we met with officials from Oneida Herkimer. Again, I wasn't involved in that discussion, but I have no idea. It's easy enough to just sit there and say, we didn't pursue it. What does that mean? Why didn't we pursue it? It wasn't a good idea? Or it was just no energy to pursue it by the legislature? I mean, I have no idea. But we can go back and look at these things. I mean, there are successful solid waste management operations all over the state, all over the country. And we ought to be looking at it.
John, you had your hand up?
A couple. One, I find difficulty in the law as it's proposed there. Rate schedule assigned to all parcels of improved property based upon the authorized use. I don't know as authorized use is defined. And likewise, if we're using zoning, authorized use of a property may be a single-family home and it may include a hotel. Now, why not charge where there's a single-family home on a parcel and authorized use is a hotel, why not charge a hotel rate for that property? I don't expect an answer, but I'm just, I think that the law needs a refinement in that situation. The other I have, we talk about businesses and so on. Sullivan County has a business telephone directory. 23 pages at approximately 400 entries per page, I'm generalizing. At $300 per entry, that's $2.4 million just for people that are declaring themselves businesses. Now that's just, go through here, probably some duplications and things like that. But I don't believe the class codes, again, pick up businesses, and they're putting too much burden on the single-family homeowner.
Paul, if I may make a suggestion, based on what Ira was saying, from a practical thing to see if it'll work, Nancy. If you look at this little commercial schedule, and let's just say for the hell of it, you said, okay, over 10,000 square feet or 15,000, pick a number, doesn't matter. That's getting you into a bigger entity. And over that, we're gonna charge $1. Everybody else is 10 cents or something. From a practical standpoint, just so we're not wasting a lot of time to see if it'll work, ask Dave if he could take a look at the system and give him a hypothetical like this and say, try to apply it and see if it'll run. And look at some of the, bigger towns, smaller ones, see what's in there. Because if he comes back, I think Bonnie's point was right on the money. If Dave comes back and says, this thing just isn't gonna work, then we wouldn't want, and I wanna make sure Kathy understands what I'm saying, we wouldn't want the legislature to try to go ahead at the end of the year and put something in place, and then Dave tries to run it, and it doesn't run right. Then
Right.
nothing is, we've just made the situation worse. We
I
haven't
absolutely
fixed anything.
agree, and we can't have staff of any department doing all that manually, because it would have to be done manually every year, all over again, and not that our office does that, but Josh's does, and it's hard enough to maintain what they maintain now.
Well,
So, unless the
also-
system pulled it, it's not a feasible way.
The fee schedule has to be done by, we have to do the resolution by November, and it's already August, so, if we could look at, can you get Dave to look at that, Nancy? I
I'll
mean,
talk to
would you-
Dave today, and
okay.
I'll send an email
Okay.
I can send it to whoever, and then
Mhm.
get transferred to everyone.
Okay, get those. Joel, I don't wanna,
No, I've always been more, I felt that the ad valorem was the right way to go in the beginning, but trying to have an alternative. Kathy, did you receive my email? This was an email I sent, and I was trying to get an idea on exactly how many parcels are paying the 120 fee and how many are paying in each of the categories that we have. So I was going to try to make a analysis and work backwards in how a fee structure would work. And
I apologize,
that's my email, and that's what if there's any way we can get some
okay, so
answers to
let's,
that.
thank
make
you, I
it-
apologize, I didn't see
Okay.
this. My stuff is sent to my home now, but let me get,
What was the question?
I wanna
Well,
get Mitch a copy of
just
this.
a copy
I'll get
of
you a
it.
cop, and for next month's meeting, we'll have the residential, commercials, we'll have it all.
It may be something that Josh has, so it may not be something.
Oh.
Yeah,
We'll
we
get-
may be able to, I haven't seen the question, so it's something we may be able to do.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
is actually something that
Okay,
Josh would do.
so give me back, I'm gonna make
Excuse
copies,
me.
okay, Joe, when
Yeah,
we're
sure,
done? Okay.
sure, absolutely,
Okay.
please do, and then.
But that's a good point.
And then I'd like to mull over that, to maybe come up with some type of a structure.
Okay.
And I realize Paul is with the codes, you definitely enlightened me more with the codes and everything, and
That's the problem
that's
is like.
the major problem.
Right.
But,
We can't do it based on square footage, and we just learned why, and, I don't know how we do the breakdowns of, like, this building is X amount of square footage, but you can't, what would the fee be for this?
I think though, if it worked, we have to do his second scenario and do broad ranges and only do maybe 3 or something.
Okay. Bonnie?
The other question I have too, when somebody comes in for an appeal and say they have if you're still gonna use codes, and they have a code of, say, 480 or something, and everybody, the 480s are all paying $300. Now, somebody comes in and appeals that code, and if they agree, yes, they shouldn't be paying that, they're gonna pay whatever. How do you keep track of that? Are you keeping, they have to be manually done, correct?
Well, we have a database that's pulled from the RPS system that MAS helps you with, and it dumps into a big spreadsheet. So I have a spreadsheet of all, whatever there are, 60, 70,000 parcels that has the SBL and all their information whenever they got charged. So that's our starting point for the following year. The MAS department takes that database and then takes the new roll, compares them, because there could be new parcels could combine, so they spit out all of the exceptions. We clean them up, and then we go back to all the appeals and all the COEs that were done and make those adjustments. So yes, it's a relatively
So
labor-intensive task to do, but yeah, we have to work off the old compared to the new roll. So we would take, for this year, take the 12 final charges and roll, compare it to the 13 new roll based on if there's new parcels, combined parcels, clean all those up, and then we also make a manual adjustment for all the COEs that real property would do, and then all the appeals that the committee would do.
John?
Just with the idea of ranges of square footages and so on there, might there not be direct relationship between appraised or assessed value and the square footage? And that way there might be three ranges, 0 to 200,000 as a number, 200 to 500 as a number, and 500,000. I'm just wondering if maybe
Right.
that would be a simple way of, if there is such a correlation. Might be a few exceptions, and then the ones that, there'd be a grievance process. Let's say if they have 1 million square feet and they're only assessed at 100,000, I don't know, but just maybe it's an idea.
Ira? Oh,
I was gonna say that, it sounds like an ad valorem.
Bonnie?
The other question I have too, it still hasn't been resolved too, where, there's multi-parcels, like a 280 that could have 100 houses, and then there's the 210 that has one house. They're all paying 120. And the mobile home thing needs to be addressed, because you can't, I mean, I understand you're capping it, but it's still, if you're gonna charge every house $120, then if something's coded at 280, it could have 2 houses, it could have 200 houses, and there are situations like that in the town. That's not, that has to be addressed, because you're not being fair to the other person that has the 210.
So are you saying maybe if somebody had 100 houses, instead of having a capped fee, they should be charged a small amount per?
I think what she's saying is there's.
Well, a house is a
say-
house.
Right, resolution wise, right
But-
now, a 200 series
charged
residential is 120.
I don't wanna put Joe on the spot, but I'm gonna, cause that's why Joe said, Joe owns a trailer park, correct, Joe? So if you had to, if your trailers were based on 120 feet per, like a house, you said you'd never be able to afford it. It would cost you a,
It would be ridiculous, that's for sure.
But I have a trailer park that has 6 people that live in it that are
Okay.
85 years old and older, and every one of them is paying $120.
March Brown,
It just doesn't seem fair.
They get
Much
a
brown.
separate assessment. They're all separately
Well, they have
assessed.
the star.
No, it's one parcel.
It's because they
Well,
they
if
don't
it's
get the
six,
minimum,
yeah.
that's all.
It's
They're on the
it's capped, it's $120
No, they
per
don't hit
unit,
the
up to
$1,800.
$1,800 or something.
Right.
Paul,
Marge keeps complaining, Marge Brown in Bethel, because she's got, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, multiple parcels where she's got 20, 30 houses on the parcel in some of these various types of clubs. The whole thing pays $180. How
They pay
can this,
$108
it's
because
not
they have
fair.
Because that one had the enhanced star.
One
It's
had
just
the enhanced
grossly
star.
unfair.
Mhm.
Because I mean, if you're gonna fix, the residential is not the biggest problem
Right,
here, it's
those
the
are all paying-
commercial.
right.
But if you're gonna fix the commercial ones, like you said, if it's a 280, there might be, and it's a site, every house has a site.
I think I mentioned this in an earlier meeting, only because the gentleman called me and I said I would. He was a developer and he built
Oh,
he had a condominium project that he built here in the county. And because of the economy, you know, he's still sitting entitled to these, whatever it was, 64 units,
Right,
right? So he's got 64 times 120. And he says, you know, I'm paying every one of these. So to me, that's no different than an apartment complex or a trailer park, you know, mobile home park or anything else. And it seems to me, it's the cost of doing business. It's easy enough to say, Joe, with all due respect, that, you know, you can't do business or it would put you out of business or whatever it is you just said. You know, so grossly and unfair the other way. There's just no justification. People produce solid waste. If you're living in an apartment, if you're living in a mobile home, you can't have 400 families living in 400 mobile homes, capped at 120 times 8. It's just not fair for everybody else in the county.
John?
Along the refinement on that same thought, though, if one has 400 mobile home units, are all 400 rented at all, or occupied at that one time, or should a ratio be, say, only 3/4 or 60%? So I don't fully agree that even if one has 500 units available, it's highly unlikely that all 500 are producing waste at any one time. So
And again, that's not what our law is based on. It's not based on how much waste.
It does say the ability to provide waste, but that way vacant land also, going back to that, has the ability to produce waste. We don't charge the vacant lands. Maybe that's
Well, we
getting
do now.
resolved. I don't know if
Because they
that's.
changed that last December. so-
It's in the local law, Josh,
Do what?
that all parcels would be,
What?
the one that got changed. It's the solid waste local law got changed, and that was what's in it.
Yeah, last December. They handed that out to us.
I'll get you a copy of it.
So I would like to see this legislature authorize a group, whatever group that is, to contact, set up a meeting with people from Ulster, people from Pike and Wayne.
I agree with you. Long term, we have to look at, well, I think the big question for me now, and do we want to stay in the solid waste business? Because it's becoming, well, you know, it's, we have real issues and real problems with it. But on the other hand, it's a service we provide to the people of this county that we've been providing for years, and who would then take over the solid waste if we didn't do it, would be the townships. I'm sure they wouldn't be happy about that, number one. Number two is I agree with Ira, we have to have a long-term plan. There has to be acreage in the county somewhere where you could, if you needed to, that's in a remote area that we could maybe possibly talk about siting a landfill. I'm not sure, that's another discussion.
Sure we could find some.
But I also like the regional issue with
Yeah.
Ulster County and the other counties, that they all need to, they will all have solid waste, and it has to go somewhere. If it's, would not only be a savings, Ira, but would make a profit, that's even more enticing to me. So that would be long-term, and I would be willing to have that discussion, maybe starting, you know, in a couple months. But for the time being, would still like to get a handle on the commercial, on the, you know, because I'd like to have, we started out with some goals. Unfortunately, we have to have the resolution in by November if we're gonna change any of the fees. So if Nancy could speak to Dave about, how we would come up with some solutions as to the square footage or the sectors and all that, that would be great. I'm gonna take a look at, Joe has some questions I'm gonna print out for you for next month. Anything else, Bonnie?
I just have one other thing. Before, we need to look at these fees, but don't we all agree here before we decide what the fee's gonna be for each system? We need to know how much is in the budget for this particular year that we're raising. Like, we're just putting these fees in place and collecting this money. How much do we need to?
Haven't really
Who
looked.
has them?
The departments in the past, I'm trying to remember the date. The past 2 or 3 weeks, the departments submitted their budgets, but budget staff hasn't had time to necessarily meet with them and refine their request yet, so I can't come up with a solid number on what that fee will have to raise at this point, but.
You mean the overall fee or
Well, I'm
solid
just
waste
saying,
fee
if we're
only?
gonna start charging vacant land now, you're gonna have how many more parcels you're collecting money for? We've already been funding it, collecting it off of the
Solid waste.
commercials and so now you're adding another layer. Those fees need to be adjusted then accordingly, because now you're collecting.
Ira?
I was gonna say, not necessarily. You could adjust the fees, Bonnie, and so that you end up with the same, you end up raising the same amount of money. The effect of that would be to reduce the other existing fees. Or you could raise more money and pay off the debt sooner. And be done with this sooner.
But we've already collected it for 4 years already. It doesn't look like we've paid that much off.
Paid what off?
Like
debt?
we're paying the debt, like the debt that we started with.
Well, we can
When we
provide a
first
debt
did
schedule,
this.
the debt schedule
That's
goes
the-
out another.
Well,
I'll
this
let
is
you know.
basically what this says,
Did you
is
get-
by
Did you get one of those, Bonnie?
this is for what it was
Yeah.
borrowed for, that all has to do with
Two thousand
landfill.
twenty-two, was that the date when?
I forget, I think,
Well,
I
that
think
was
when the
the
land.
other,
How much
before
debt
I
are we
handed
paying
out
every
here.
year?
We even-
When the landfill closed, I can get you the exact figures, but I wanna say the principal outstanding was approximately 40 million. We're now down to 28 million, so we have paid off $12 million of principal over those 3 years, or whatever it is. I can get you more exact, but just in that broad range.
And Ira,
Okay.
John and Bill, and we did talk about refinancing, but didn't we refinance last year? We
did,
saved some money.
right, that's
Ira,
why if you look at
right.
this, and the one I gave
Okay.
you before, it's off a little bit, the reason it's
Okay.
off is from the refinancing interest
I was
saved.
just gonna say, you mentioned the time period here and the November date. And we've been talking about these things. I don't know what the sense of this group is. Maybe we can take one or two of these items, even generally, and say, next month, September, let's go to, whether, I don't know what committee, your committee, executive committee, whatever you think is appropriate. And say, this group has been discussing this. Let's get a feel of the legislature. Let's say, we're recommending a fee, whatever that fee may be. And maybe it's 2 or 3 fees, depending on the size of the vacant land, but we're recommending a fee on vacant land, which we don't currently bill. And if everything else remained the same, we would generate, obviously, more money than we're generating now. What's the sense of the legislature? Because if they're not interested, then we're wasting our time here. If they are interested, then we'll put it into place and we'll move on.
Well, one issue, I think Paul and I spoke about this, about vacant land, and we have these issues, in Bethel. If you're talking about a strip of vacant land, is that fair to say we're gonna charge them 120? Or if something has 10 acres of vacant land, should that be, of course, should be another number? So I think we really have to think about that, because you're gonna have, like I said, Marge Brown and some other people saying, well, I only have a tiny strip of, so why should I pay the 120? So
Yeah.
how are we gonna, Paul?
And unless you do it ad valorem, you've got all these
Right.
problems, which gets you back to,
Right.
are you making a decision to say, we're not gonna do this ad valorem, period? And unless, you gotta decide something, it's one of the.
So, I'm not so sure, so what I suggest, Ira, is I'm not so sure I can bring anything back to the legislator in September, because I wanna see the numbers and I wanna have something written from this committee. Maybe do it in October, because the resolution has to be passed by November. I'm just not so sure we would be ready for September, because don't have the numbers, we haven't decided on the square footage or the segments and how we would change that, so, but certainly I'll bring it up at my DPW meeting or at Scott's executive, and
Can we get a sense of, for example, well, it sounds to me, I said this before, it sounds to me like you're saying we should scrap this and go to an ad valorem system.
I think,
And my question is if that's, what's
I think
what's
the
the sense of the
legislature.
majority of this? Okay.
I think the legislature needs to make that decision philosophically, so we know what direction we're going. If you go back to ad valorem, you fix a multitude of things. If the answer is no, they don't want to do that, then you're left with trying to figure out how to make this thing work.
Right,
That's simply put.
right.
I'm sorry, Paul, I didn't hear your last sentence.
Okay, I said the legislature needs to make the decision. If it goes back to the ad valorem concept, you automatically fix all of these things we're discussing. And if the legislature philosophically says, no, we're not gonna do ad valorem, we wanna continue with this,
Okay.
then you gotta deal with the system.
Okay.
How is the ad valorem different than the real property tax?
I'm sorry, Sam, I'm not understanding.
How is the ad valorem different from the real property tax?
In the real property tax?
And the real property tax.
That's what he's. I
He
think
said,
he's
what's
talking
the difference
property
between,
tax.
It's not, that's what he's talking about, right?
He just used it, yeah.
Okay?
You're just talking the tax
Against-
levy.
When you say ad valorem, what you're really doing is saying you add it to the real
Yeah,
property tax.
that's what he's saying.
That's right, and you
Okay,
could,
because
a special line on the bill, just like you're doing now.
People keep-
You know,
I think there's
who's
a
on the committee to put
notion
these
that ad
prices
valorem
together?
is something
Wasn't me.
special and
It's
aside.
David
It isn't.
Wells.
It's the real property
You know,
tax.
also-
Right, and it's against
Well,
The
that.
real
that
property
woman,
tax
you know,
gets you back
it
into
wasn't
tax
her.
exempt and all the rest.
Right.
Right,
These figures.
exactly.
Right, so we know if we
Who's
wanna
the
raise the
committee?
same
Yeah,
amount of
who's
money,
Was you
it's
weren't on
right
earlier?
now probably a 0.7% increase or an 0.8% increase on the real property tax.
You break the bills out right
Right?
now, showing all
Roughly.
those things, you could do a separate line and do it for that as well.
More than, you
Except,
said 8/10 of it?
except we know
8%?
approximately 300,000 that we
What, are
collected
you
in the
raising
past.
$8
$400,000?
But what is it gonna end up
You're raising
happening?
$400,000
You can
tax exemptions.
mechanically do it, and selfishly it would make my life a lot easier, because then the committee's easier.
But,
I appreciate
hold
it.
on, there's a but.
There's gonna invariably be so-called winners and losers. I mean, if you have a very high assessment, that 10% tax increase is gonna be far in excess of the 120 or 300. Likewise, if you have a very low assessment, that 120 could turn into $10, $50, I don't know, but there's
Right.
gonna be a wide range
Yeah.
of what's gonna happen. But you would also address some of the concerns you heard from Ira about the vacant land. They would automatically then get charged. You could have $1 million piece of vacant land that's now gonna get charged that extra $6 million, a piece of that $6 million. So
Which they always were.
they always were before.
But they
yeah.
don't understand that, but when it was on the line that says county, they always were charged exactly that way.
That's right.
I think Paul's right, though. I mean, I think we need to say, are we gonna continue to try to work with this user fee or
This is
access
all-
fee
Right.
until we pay off the debt, or at least for the next few years? If we're not, we go into the back to ad valorem, back to the tax levy, which does away with a number of issues and creates a number of issues.
Okay.
If we are gonna stick with it, then I think we've gotta do what I suggested, which is present some options to the legislature about vacant land, about caps and unit fees and all that. And yes, you will be creating additional inequity with vacant land, like you said, Kathy, strips and 10-acre pieces.
Right.
You know what? We gotta know that going in. That's the nature of this system. But the bottom line is, we will be at least now hitting the property owners that are paying nothing, which is unfair. And, in my opinion, not within the spirit of the law. And, it'll be generating revenue. And I think that's a good thing.
Okay,
Kathy,
so-
so I have to run.
Yes.
And then, when you're raising all of these funds and you're raising the taxes on these poor people that cannot afford it, do you know what's gonna happen? The county's gonna get more properties, and you're not thinking about that. Because there's a lot of people out there that can't even afford what they're paying right now.
Yeah, we think about it all the time, but.
Well, you know what, I'm a taxpayer in Fallsburg, and I'm thinking about all the people that are in Fallsburg that cannot afford, and they're not making the paychecks that are in a county building.
Yeah.
They're making the nickel and dimes,
Yeah,
and
no,
it's
I know.
not fair.
I understand that.
But I don't
Government
think it's,
services
hold on,
cost money.
but I think you're missing the point. We're not gonna try to raise the 120. That's, no, if anything, we're gonna try to lower that and charge the commercial properties or people that have more. We're not.
You know what
We're not
what I
trying-
feel would be right is if you're going into these big commercial properties and you're saying, okay, we need more money because it needs to be fair. But when you're going to undeveloped properties, what kind of solid waste do they have?
Again, you have to understand too that those properties always did pay it until this law went into effect, because it was in the budget in whole. They've always been paying it. Again, the rates, there were rates then. When you take a budget, say our county budget's $200 million, just use that figure. In that
Okay,
$200
well,
million,
let me ask you something,
this
so
was in
I
there.
can understand. Let's just say I have a half an acre or an acre of property. It's vacant. It doesn't have a house on it.
Then the assessed value is probably $30,000.
Okay,
The ad valorem goes on that $30,000.
all right, and what would you be charging on that 30,000?
They would do it in general to see all the, Josh, you can explain that better, you're the budget.
Well, I mean, if you're gonna stick with the user access fee and charge all vacant lands a set rate, I don't know, I mean, the committee hasn't really talked about rates per se, but if it goes into the tax levy, the ad valorem, it's gonna be dependent upon what your assessment is. If it's $1 million piece of property, you're gonna be paying a lot more than
I mean, it's 20.
like $120 or whatever, but if
Yeah.
you have a $500 assessment, you'll probably be paying a couple dollars.
Okay, I understand that, but have they been assessed already? Have they been paying that already? Or is this gonna be something new being put
Well, I
on
think
their
what
It's
Nancy
something
was
they've
saying,
always been
before
paying.
the access fee, they were always paying because it was part of the ad valorem.
Okay.
When they created the access fee, vacant land was no longer charged as to fund the solid waste operations, but I think if either option, if we go back to just straight ad valorem, it will pick up whatever the user, a percent of whatever the user fee was generating or access fee. And if what Ira is suggesting, if some of the committee members are suggesting is to charge vacant land, I don't know what that number is, but yes, it would in theory would get a charge.
And we're trying to actually help the people that have been paying 120 because it's, it started at 85, then it went to 120. We want to keep it at that, if not less. So we share your pain. I know what you're saying. We don't want to charge them more. No,
No.
Bill
In
and
the
then
past,
John.
they just didn't see what they paid.
Okay.
That was all.
Bill?
Yeah, real quick. New York State has actually dangled a small carrot at municipalities statewide in the past year to consider regionalizing different aspects of their sustainability programs. In this case, the Mid-Hudson Regional Sustainability Consortium met and submitted some project ideas to request funding to look at consolidating or regionalizing solid waste infrastructure. One of the ideas that was submitted, and I don't think it got any traction, but it was a look at actually getting planning units in New York State to work together. Politically, that's often a big challenge. If you think about combining Sullivan County Solid Waste Program with Orange County's program, it's tough to get the political DNAs in the same cell membrane, if you will, and produce something that's going to work. But if you had a much more, a larger New York State template, like each of the New York State DEC planning units, regions 1 through 9, as their own separate groups that could work together to share resources, our planning units might cooperatively get more traction. And going forward, and this doesn't address the old debt, but it perhaps could be a way that we can keep an eye on the future and maybe save cost as much as possible. That said, take a look when you're home. If you're having a little trouble getting to sleep, look up on the New York State DEC's website. Simply Google the Beyond Waste Solid Waste Management Plan, which is the guidance document New York State has empowered planning units like ours to follow. If you have a solid waste permit, such as Sullivan County maintains for all of its transfer stations and landfills, that's essentially the hook that New York State has over us to comply with the solid waste management planning process. And that can be very challenging. The Beyond Waste Plan picks up where the 1992 solid waste plans largely left off, and that is getting away from waste disposal, looking at more sustainable matters of waste management like composting, waste reduction, managing solid waste and hazardous materials more efficiently, and regionalizing those disposal options. So going forward, the solutions look better than our options in the past, but we could still be faced with making the same expensive choices going forward if we're not aware of what those options are going to be.
How do they define a planning unit?
A planning unit can be either a county or a collection of counties that have joined to form a solid waste authority. For instance, Sullivan County is its own planning unit. Ulster County is its own planning unit, but Ulster County took the additional step of incorporating into a solid waste authority. It's a separate aspect of the county legislature, and it creates, and Sam can probably give even more feedback to this than I can, it creates another level of solid waste management authority, if you will, and takes a step away from the legislature, but can put that cost back on the county if the solid waste authority runs into a debt situation. In the case of Oneida Herkimer, we've actually had Hans Arnold here, I believe, several years ago, sharing ideas about a two-county solid waste authority, Oneida County, Herkimer County. The Montgomery, Otsego, and Schoharie County Authority, MOSA, which is also on the list here, formed several years ago. They've had some trouble. It hasn't been a politically good marriage there for them. They're looking at disbanding. I don't know if they're still in the process of doing that or not, but there are some potentials with forming authorities, but there are also some challenges in trying to get counties with very different ideologies and finances to work together.
So is a planning unit a function of having a permit?
In many cases it is, and in most cases in New York State, every planning unit has some permitted solid waste facility. I thought Erie County did as well. They may not, in fact, according to this list, but most counties do. We're all governed by New York State. DEC can pretty much give us a lot of strong direction and hold our hands if they'd like to see us investing more resource in one direction than another.
So as far as this carrot you're talking about, I mean, how does that work? Are we looking at Region 2 as a planning unit?
Or Region 3 in our case, and it was not widely well received. personally, and this was just an idea that we floated, I was on the solid waste panel that met to discuss options for the state. We suggested actually having DEC be the planning unit mentor, if you will, to better challenge or better marshal resources from counties. In other words, in Region 3, we're 6 counties in Region 3. We may only need 1 incinerator in that region, or 1 composting facility, or 1 landfill. Yet the planning unit model with the solid waste management plans requires each county to do its own thing. So County A may have its own landfill, compost facility, incinerator. It may have excess resource. There's no good way to get 2 counties to work together to maybe look at that a little more efficiently and say, we actually need 1 incinerator for 3 counties, or 1 compost facility for 3 counties, rather than each county trying to cookie cutter its compliance with the state solid waste management process and come up with its own plan.
I see Sam shaking his head, we may
Well,
not like the idea.
DEC, I don't,
Yeah.
you know my feeling about
I'm
that.
not, I'm not
Understood.
sure, I'm not sure what the option is when you're
But-
talking about a consortium.
What Bill was talking about a planning unit, one of the problems is because we say about getting out of solid waste, we almost can't. Because the planning document that goes back, God, what was the original one done?
1991.
Which said that we had a target of, I think I got these percentages right, that within 5 years, we would have 71% recycling, and we got up to like 6% recycling. They're gonna hold you to that part of it, so
Yeah, but to me,
you're gonna still be under the,
Yeah.
because the county back then made some very ambitious, for lack of a better term, commitments as to what it would do, and never followed up on it. And this county, unlike, a county like Westchester, where I lived in Mamaroneck many years ago, there was garbage pickup 3 days a week, all the rest, leaf pickup, and it was just part of your local taxes. Nobody even thought about it. It was just a local municipal service, and that's fine in an area with that kind of population density. You get out to the western part of the county and you say, we're not gonna be in the business, then it becomes a real problem, and I don't think
It's so more
anybody's,
rural, right?
you gotta look at it differently.
we talk about county jail,
Yeah,
another issue.
yeah.
Do we have to bring that up now?
Well, I only bring it up to say, we know what the conundrum is when we talk about different approaches, including a regional approach.
Right.
Which only to me underscores how obvious, at least to me it is, that when you're talking about solid waste management, a regional approach is the only answer.
It is, you're right. And interestingly enough, now, neither Oneida or Herkimer have ever had to write a check. But that authority, which was created by the state of New York, is backstopped technically by the full faith and credit of each county. So that authority rides on the taxing capability of the 2 counties. Now, they've never had to do it because they've been able to run that authority so efficiently and so well. But for bonding purposes and credit rating, in order to achieve that, they pledged the full faith and credit of each county behind it, because otherwise the authority really had nothing.
Okay, we have another meeting at 11. Anything else? And, okay, so Nancy will see if we can work on.
Well, you know what, my suggestion is, and it's only my suggestion, but I can send this to you. I really think that when we get any information, if it goes to the group, people have it in advance, they can even
Okay.
email back and forth a little bit, so it's not cold each meeting, that maybe there's been some conversation in the 4 weeks in between.
That's a good idea,
I
okay.
work with you with Dave.
I want to give Dave a copy of this.
We're gonna tell him
How
what
do
we
you
want.
turn this off?
Okay.
Let me just make a copy. Oh, yeah, the third Thursday, anybody have a calendar? The third Thursday in September, we'll meet again 10 o'clock.
19.
The 19th, okay? And Nancy's right, if you can email that information out, you'll have it, then we can have a,
And even if someone comes up with a suggestion of something else that would need something looked into, it wouldn't hurt to have some email conversations around.
anybody, is that okay with everybody? You have everybody's email address?
I
have it.
don't, but you do.
I do, right, yeah, I have it, let me just make a copy of this for my, let me get, okay, so, if you could just turn that off.